So, like I said, we're going to talk more about banking issues today. One of the things we're going to look at too is a couple of the different videos and stuff, and sort of some catch-up kind of things that we, can expand a little bit more. We only have about, in terms of PowerPoint things, about 6 or 7 more slides, but there's a couple videos that I think would be kind of helpful just to kind of show you what's sort of available. There's a internet program out there. It's an online thing, not something you have to necessarily download like Microsoft Money or Quicken or something like that. Although they're all kind of the same people into it, the software company that's involved. But anyway, it's been around for a while, and it's kind of a budgeting tool, and allows you, if you're diligent enough to keep on top of it in terms of entering all your expenses, and maybe even importing your expenses if you choose to do it that way. Anyway, it'll tell you how you're basically spending your money. And if you're one of those kind of people, that's probably a great way to do it. Like I say, I'm not one of those people to, do something every single day. It's like, house plants and stuff like that, they absolutely die when I buy them because I forget to water them. I'll be very impulsive and get out there and do something, one day of the week, and then I'll blow them off and walk right past them for weeks on end. Well, these, budgeting type software things, they're sort of like that. You enter in your daily expenses and you kind of see where you're going, and at the end of the month, it presents you where all my money went kind of thing. And if that's helpful, or especially if you're, you and your spouse, or your significant other, whatever, maybe it's a way to communicate and come up with some priorities. Let me show you a video. This video, this one actually comes from the authors, from their section, and so it's starting to get a little bit dated.
Investor said you'll never change human behavior. People are set in their ways with regards to finance.
We'll start.
The truth is 90% all the investors said you'll never change human behavior. People are set in their ways with regards to finance. The truth is 90% of people who use Mint say they've changed their spending habits simply by seeing where their money was going. Once you see that you spend more on restaurants than you do on rent, or that you went to Starbucks literally 47 times last month, it changes behavior just to know that. 40% of our users say they actually dine out less and cook more at home because of Mint. The new feature that we're launching is called Financial Goals. And Financial Goals is a system for figuring out how to, in a step-by-step manner, get out of debt, save for retirement, buy a home, save for your kids' college, buy a car, take a trip, or any custom goal that you want. So we will take buy a home as an example.
I believe this is the time to buy.
And what's great about this is Mint already knows quite a bit about you in terms of what your annual income might be. It pulls in the average 30-year fixed rate automatically, pulls in the average property tax and annual insurance rates. So really, you have very little to adjust. So you put in your income, and it says you can afford a home that costs about $800,000. It's going to be a $4,100 monthly payment. That's the aggressive assumption. Here's what it would be if it was more conservative. So it says if you're saving up 20% down, you need $131,000 for your down payment. So you click next, give it a title, Dream Home, and then you can set a date for when you want to achieve this. As you set a date, it adjusts what you need for your monthly contribution. That monthly contribution looks very large, so I'm going to say, you know what, this is a few years out. And I can say, okay, well, I can save up that much each month. You can upload a photo of your dream house if you'd like. And then it'll show you your progress, and it says, here's how much you saved so far this month out of the $2,000 that you were supposed to save. And then for each goal, you've got a set of steps that you want to go through. So it says, here's your planned date, here's your projected date, if you keep saving at this rate, when you'll actually reach it, so you're slightly ahead of schedule. determine what you can afford, understanding what percentage of your income should go towards a home, making sure that you've got your credit score in order. So it's a mixture of content and advice that we've got in there that helps you step by step achieve each goal.
So those guys are still out there. Obviously their site would improve over time, but it's one way of kind of budgeting and looking at how you're going to get to where you need to be. Here's another one that is kind of related to what we've been talking about in terms
We all complain about our checking accounts.
A little too much
Low
money.
interest rates, high fees, inconvenient hours, or bad customer service. Turns out that a lot of the things that people tend to worry about when contemplating switching banks aren't worth worrying about much at all. The first thing people tend to worry about is whether there's a branch nearby. But really, why does it matter? It might be that you need a teller every so often, say if you need to cash a check or make some deposit that you need to clear relatively quickly. But otherwise, you probably don't need a branch at all. People tend to worry next about all of the ATM fees they might pay if they work with a bank that has no branches. But many internet banks will waive all, or at least most of your ATM fees if you have your checking account with them. So ask about this first, and then withdraw money from any ATM you want. The next concern is probably all of those automated payments you have hardwired into your current checking account. You're going to have to switch those, and it'll probably take 2 hours of calling around to various utilities and whatnot, and also to track down a direct deposit form from your employer. But what if all of those changes to your automated payments don't all go through at the same time? This is the biggest potential hitch. If at all possible, leave enough money behind in the old bank account just in case any billers draw on it one last month. Then close that account as soon as all of your billers and other payments are being drawn from the new bank account. Now that you're thinking about switching, you're probably wondering whether a credit union or an internet-only bank is going to have the same technology as the big banks do. Well, it used to be that they were a little bit behind the times, but they've mostly caught up with the basics at this point. And if you're looking for, say, online money management software or budgeting software, and the credit union doesn't have it, you can always use a third-party site like Mint.com for something like that.
So again, I had to do this recently. I did it last year, switched everything. I was real frustrated with that one bank and closed everything I had with them and moved all the investments and everything else out of there. Finally, it took a lot of doing, but they finally came to their senses, came crawling back and gave me my $900, whatever it was, back from this silly lady's cable bill. I'd been her customer forever. And so, and again, it also, we'll get into this stuff later when we talk about consumer stuff, but don't basically take no for an answer, and in my mind, I don't waste any time with online forms or, email complaints or whatever, because, it's like your own emails. They're so easy to delete. They don't really have much impact, and I find that writing a regular letter, that's ultimately what drove me to this point. I wrote a letter to basically the president of the bank, and, it was kind of logical, and, you really want to do this? This is really, because it's basically, like I said, there was some fraud or just neglect on their part, and, I was going to stand for it. So finally it came around, and anyway, I do some banking with them now. So anyway, does anybody use Apple Pay? No, not so much. That's one thing that's not even mentioned on here in terms of electronic payments. But this is kind of the way of the future. Unfortunately, this may be the only way of the future. It's not going to happen here anytime soon. But they've proposed it, and they're talking about doing it in Europe, where they actually make it a cashless society. Where you don't use, where you have to have some sort of electronic payment. And from a big government perspective, man, that would be nice for them, because then they can get a hold of, and there's cuts down on fraud, all this under the table stuff. And so there's a lot of motivation, but then again, since people hopefully elect people, and there is some pressure to consider the will of the people. But it depends on the culture too. When I was in Spain, I lived about 4 years in Madrid, and if you were using a credit card, it conveyed that you can't afford what you're buying, basically. That the whole macho thing was to pay cash, and anybody who used a card was just anyway. I think that stigma is probably going away. But, like I said, I use a credit card for everything. Literally 59-cent purchases, and hit cancel. Anyway, you're in and out of there quicker. If it's less than $25 or $50, depending on the store's policy, there's not even signature required. So it's gotten to the point now that it's quicker than cash. And I take, for my business, for example, I use Square, which a lot of people use. Where you sign, where you have a little attachment on your smart card or on your smartphone, and boom. And I love it as well, because not that I'm greedy or trying to get people into trouble, but I find that people, although I have to pay a 3% fee, people tend to spend a little bit more freely when they're putting on a credit card. Or they go, I could use some miles. Yeah, okay, I'll take this too. You know what I mean? So there's incentive for merchants. You see some merchants that say, if you're going to use a credit card, I'm going to charge you a 3% fee. I think that's kind of boneheaded, because they don't realize, that they probably are losing some sales. People will postpone things, and something else may change. They may find somebody else. So anyway, I always use it. I also use again, this was what caused more trouble for me when I was trying to switch banks, is that I use their basically their bill pay service to write checks. Being up here in Alaska, trying to get a check to somewhere in the lower 48, sometimes, given the post office, can take 6 days or whatever. The bank that I use for this is actually based in Texas, and I have people, I'll just set them up on a bill pay thing, and boom, just fire a check, and it goes straight from the bank, and there's no fee, and it comes to them, and it has the appearance of a cashier's check or a certified check. It's not, but anyway, but people are more happy to take that typically than a personal check. So I don't know how many you write checks. I mean, I still have to keep a checkbook around. My hay guy still takes checks, but every time now it's like an ordeal to figure out how to sign it, and do all. It's the only time I write cursive. It's just not when it's time to pay bills for me. I don't write any checks to. In fact, if they'll take a credit card, that's why I want to pay for everything, so I can get the loans. Online payments, also there's they don't address PayPal and things like that. Those are actually fairly useful in terms of paying for things. If any time you're involved in the transaction and somebody wants to use Western Union or some sort of wiring money, I mean, I wire money to Germany once a month, but I also wire money for a mortgage, but I also will wire money if I'm transferring between my accounts. But if you're involved in some transaction, any Craigslist thing, and they even mention Western Union or wiring money, they're pretty much a fraudster. I mean, that's once those funds go, there's no getting it back. And so, a lot of people don't even use Craigslist because of that, because there's just so many scam artists out there. I probably get, it depends, maybe on an average 3 or 4, phishing things a week. But that's where I, market my stuff, so it's just the cost of doing business. Store value cards. The problem with those is I've only had it happen once, where a Lowe's card where they loaded up whatever as a refund, and it didn't take, and I had absolutely no record. I had no, it was only like $15, but it just sort of, taught me a lesson that those things are, if there's a mistake done, there's no recourse, there's no paper trail. Also, there is no, if you lose it, it's gone. It's as valuable as cash. So if you've got store value cards, be careful with that. We've got a guy, and again, he would be somebody, a guy I know who would be one of those people on the just this extreme extent who's, like the guy talks about in the thing, people, when they use our service, they find out they don't dine out as much and they don't buy coffee as much. You can take that to an extreme, and now your lifestyle is being so diminished, and you need to live a little. I mean, you don't want to. The goal of personal finance is not to it's to be smart with your money, but not Scrooge McDuck or whoever, in terms of miserly. But anyway, a friend of mine, what he will do, and he's put a lot of time into this. My understanding or my feeling is that if he would have put this time in a more business-oriented thing, he could have been a millionaire. But what he does is he goes to cars and he buys the gift cards, right? And he waits till there's a deal on the miles. And so he's got a big purchase to do at Home Depot or Lowe's or somebody. He'll go in there and buy $400 or $600 worth of gift cards at cars. So he gets the fuel credits for that month. And then he goes to the hardware store and then uses these, gift cards. And then he, obviously does the military discount, so he gets another 10%. But it's a lot of work, you know what I mean? But it does work out, and when you're getting a buck a gallon off or whatever because you've got so many miles, because cars or some of those, Fred Meyers will do those loyalty things. But there's ways if you want to work around it. But I tell you what, you lose that $200 gift card, you're done. It's going to take a long time to make up for that kind of loss. And those things are it's like cash. So they can be stolen just as well. Also, not that Circuit City, it's been a few years since they went out of business, but anybody who's holding a card from Circuit City, a store credit card, a gift certificate, a gift card, those, you are at the bottom of the creditors when the company goes out of business. So those went worthless on you. And then smart cards and different things. I'll show you some videos of, it's primarily in Europe where a lot of these card, scams have started, but it's getting pretty bad. There's the new cards. Obviously, most cards now have a chip on them, which is supposed to be a little bit safer, but it's a lot more cumbersome to use. And then you've got some that even offer a photo on them, but it's still rife with fraud. None of my credit cards in my wallet are signed. I just always forget to do that. But anyway, nobody checks. There's no. But if you are the consumer and the merchant takes that card, whether it's you or a fraud person, they have to make it right. The bank can't come back to you and say, oh, that card wasn't signed, or you're somehow responsible. With credit cards, it's per statute, per law, that they're stuck with that. A couple of these other, payment methods. We're just going to kind of expand about what we've already talked about. Different options in checking account. You probably looked at your homework, in terms of what your options are. But basically, if you're paying a fee for checking, you probably can find a better bank. You can probably find somebody who won't charge you that. And again, if it's interest-free with a minimum balance, then it's not necessarily interest-free. But other things to consider, restrictions, fees, overdraft protection. Those fees are where they can make a ton of money off you. But again, don't just accept it. Especially if it's something legitimate. I used to have an account with Northrim, and I dumped them because, or no, it was Denali. I've had both, but you would deposit a check, and it would show you have $2,000 in the account, so you automatically pay your Visa bill with that account. Well, yeah, but we don't post that deposit you made until after midnight, and so they claim I essentially bounced a check. It's like if you're showing it in my account, I'm drawing a check on it, and the problem that your accounting is too slow. So anyway, I talked to the bank manager about it, and sure enough, he refunded those charges, and then I just said, I'm done with you guys anyway. But don't accept those fees. They literally will add up, and especially when you're a college student, that's just part of life. You're always max performing the checking account, and things happen. You need to make sure you've got some protection. Individual or joint accounts, sure. The problem, what you don't want on an account in terms of flexibility is that an account that says "and," unless you specifically want that. But sometimes you will see checking accounts where, Bob and Sue, and there's two signatures required. The banks will usually caution you away from that, but you're really going to lose some flexibility, especially in terms of a problem. Deposit tickets, they don't really mess with this much anymore, and endorsements. You know, when you get a check, typically when you go to the bank, it depends on the level. Again, I sold a bulldozer to a guy a couple nights ago for like $12,500. And anyway, I wanted the deal to be done. He's like, "Well, you take a check?" I'm like, "You know, how far are you going to go with a bulldozer?" Sure. You know what I mean? So I took his check and I go into the bank, and I didn't have to sign the back of it. But if you do sign the back of it, it becomes negotiable. So don't sign them in advance. Or if you do, if it's like a mail type teller, because some of the online things will do that, because sometimes they will have limits on, you know, that photo system of maybe 1,000, 2,000, whatever per check. If you are going to endorse a check, which means, you know, flip it over and sign on the back, put, unless you want it for cash, but typically you want to put for deposit only in such and such an account number. So not just your, very rarely would I ever just put my signature on there. I usually always put for deposit only in whatever my account is. So again, it's more or less worthless to somebody doing fraud. And yeah, the photo deposit, that's available at a lot of banks, but it does have restrictions, or maybe they want to, you know, hold on to it for 4 or 5 days. It's like, you know, sometimes banks come up with these arbitrary rules, because there's the time value of money works for banks as well. If they can take your deposit and not credit it to your account for 3 or 4 days, you may say, "Oh, okay." No, you do that with 1 million depositors, and they're making some real cash. You know, they're using the folks' money. So banks that are more ethical will not allow that flow. When I say that you know, the reason I switched banks is because they actually deposited my check on payday as opposed to a couple days after. You know, that's just not the bank being sloppy. That bank has those funds on, say, the 28th, and they're going to write it out and not post it to the 1st, because they're going to be able to use that money for a long time. And believe me, it adds up. I think we talked about this before. Like my favorite movie out there is Office Space, and the whole thing about the, you know, micro whatever fractions of a cent, rounding errors. You do that with enough dollars, and man, you were talking some real money. So they used to have weird things. I mean, they used to actually, before they had electronic transfer, they used to. I know a lot of guys who built pilot time, flying time, by flying checks back and forth. You know, they'd fly checks from different places. A buddy of mine, he was in Bratislava, and he would fly to Vienna, which is like nothing. It's 20 minutes. But there's an international border. Bratislava's in Slovakia, and obviously Vienna's in Austria. And he would fly across the border. He'd make 10, 15 trips a night, flying financial documents and other things across. Because if you try and do the regular border crossing, this was around the time of the EU, and the borders were not quite as fluid. Now they're actually the other extent where they are a bit too fluid for everybody. So, reconciling your checking account. So, yeah, whatever works for you, you know. Some people have the carbon checks, which is one way of doing it to keep track. The check register kind of thing, where you actually write it up each time. But better banks, again, will provide like a PDF file in your statement of every check that's out there, which is kind of a nice service. But the whole thing that falls apart on this is when you use a debit card. Because unless you're treating, I mean, theoretically, you should treat a debit card like a check, but most people don't. So they kind of fall out of your cross-check, and so you use the debit card, and now that comes directly out of your checking account like a check, and so everything kind of falls apart. So, you know, the method I use is kind of a bucket method, where I try to keep enough money in that account to cover it. I tend to use credit cards more than I do debit cards because of the fraud protection and the miles I want. And then I also have some overdraft just in case. But yeah, you start, you know, using a debit card. Typically, it'll stop you. You know, it'll just basically disallow you. But if you're using, you know, a combination of debits and checks, that's where you really get into trouble. Certified check, cashier's check. So what they do on these is, yeah, they you know, if you need a check, like I had a transaction recently, it was dealing with a horse, and it was involved a lawyer and all this other stuff, and they wanted a cashier's check, and so it's like $1,000, and the bank charged me $1 or something like that to issue a cashier's check. But the way that works is that $1,000, because it's a cashier's check, it actually comes out of my account that day, as opposed to if I write you a check for $1,000, it stays in my account until you get around to going to the bank, and then a couple days after, and all that. So there's a bit of a float. There's kind of a squishy area, and that's the whole problem where you run into checks that bounce because you're until, for example, that bulldozer. I deposited the check a couple nights ago, but it's going to be 3 or 4 days until that check is reconciled, until it's cleared. In between now and then, if that guy's account is no good, and this happened to me one time when I took a check for some tires I sold a guy, they just yank that money right back out. They might send you a note, but they'll certainly, if it causes checks to bounce, they don't come after that other person, they come after you because it's your account. So personal checks are whatever. It depends on your environment. I lived in, by virtue of being in the Air Force, I lived in Las Vegas for a while, and you flat did not take checks, nor were checks even accepted. They were just there was just so much fraud in that area. But up here, like I say, the things I sell are usually big and hard to move, and if a check happened to bounce, I could, find this person. It'd be a hassle, but it's certainly, I feel better about it. Money orders, traveler's checks. So money orders are, again, you buy a money order. You go, again, you run into these strange situations where, let's say you're doing a passport. They want a money order, okay? So you can actually buy them at the post office, which is convenient because you got to go there for your thing anyway. But you buy a money order, and it may cost you. Anybody have to buy one lately? A couple bucks. What do they run? For your what?
We do it for our rent, but it's 79 cents.
Yeah, it's competitive. And do you get them Walmart or someplace?
Yeah, we got it for
Fred Meyer, Walmart. And any of those guys will.
Banks will do it too.
Yeah, post office will do it. And it's just a way of and there is some recourse in case it happens to get lost in between you and the place, but
They give you like 5 different receipts.
yeah.
There's like a receipt.
But it's not. Yeah, it's just like what I say. It's expensive to be people without banks, because people without banks will have to use this, and these little fees tend to add up. The more money you add, the less all these fees. Free check. Oh, of course this is free, and cashier's checks, we'll do those for free because you're one of our better clients. But the poor people who can least afford it, they're the ones who get nickel and dime and end up in the pawn shops and the payday loans and the rest of that. So it can be bad. Traveler's checks. Anybody ever used a traveler's checks? And what'd you think?
It was great. It was stolen and they paid me back everything.
Okay, and so there are some stories of success. How about you?
I run a used car.
Yeah, that's how I am. I've been in some obscure places, out in the Baltics or Slovenia and things like that. And I saw a guy. I mean, literally, it's an ugly scene. The guy had traveler's checks, and I'm sure he was honest, but the place just didn't want to take them. It's like, but this is the whole point of having this traveler's check, is that I'm supposed to be covered, And I don't know if my life's dependent upon it, and I had a choice between a credit card or a traveler's check. Because the traveler's check, again, you buy them in advance, and they come in books, and they have some utility, but the worldwide network now. Anyway, if you get in that position, but they're harder to find now, I think, too. I mean, there's not as many places that sell them. Did you use them recently, or?
1970.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, so it could, and then you didn't have many choices. Now, Yeldamats and Cajero Automatico, everywhere I've ever been, and the currency. You have to, if you're going to do international travel, you do some research, but rates will definitely change. Don't ever travel internationally and get off the airplane and walk out there and go to the Monix counter or whatever and buy your coins. You're probably far better off using your regular ATM or an ATM there in the community, and you'll probably get a far better rate. Those guys in the airport, they make some serious cash off of you. So anyway. Off the subject, but traveler's checks are that kind of problem. So we're going to talk about some more things. I showed you this already, the homework from last week, but there are some of these videos that I also wanted kind of catch up on. There was a, well, I'm not going to necessarily show you the gold one right now because there are some people who still would want to invest in gold. The video I have is from somebody who sells gold traded funds, so he's very, big on gold, and we kind of needed a second viewpoint. But here's one about taxes, since we've already talked about that a little bit.
As I'm sure everyone knows, and probably ruse, the tax filing deadline is rapidly approaching. With me today to talk about how you can avoid ending up in the IRS's sights and what to do if you do is Scott Estill. He's a former IRS trial attorney and author of Tax This, Standing Up Against the IRS. Scott, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Scott, I think it's fair to say that nobody relishes the idea of getting into a scrap with the IRS. And so I think for most people, the most important thing is to try to avoid getting into that position in the first place. So what are the sorts of things that will trigger an IRS tax audit? What are the red flags that get the IRS's attention?
Well, first of all, you can't avoid an IRS audit if you file a return just because the IRS does do a lot of random audits. But they also look at specific items that may, like you mentioned, trigger an audit. One of the things that they look at is that information that's reported to the IRS, such as W-2 information, 1099, things like that, if you don't report the exact same amounts that are reported to the IRS, an audit will generate. But they also look at statistics, too, so that if you're in a particular business or if you have a rental property and your deductions are considerably higher than what they consider to be the norm for that industry, that will generate an audit as well. But that's really what the IRS is looking at, and along with any particular projects that they may be working on. The big one right now is offshore income. So anybody with offshore bank accounts has a much higher rate of audit right now.
Well, given that, what can you do to avoid your chances of being audited? Or, barring that, what can you do to make sure that your return will stand up if you are singled out by the IRS?
The first thing you want to do is understand as much as you can about the tax laws, at least those laws that apply to you, or your business or your family. And then I think you also want to make sure that you have documentation for every deduction that you take on your tax returns. So that seems to be the real key part. And when I've walked into audits for taxpayers, I've had no problems when I've had all the documentation. When the IRS sees that, they see that we have the documentation for everything. Typically that audit goes very quickly because they want to move on to the next person, and the next person may not be so fortunate with their record keeping.
In your experience, is there one mistake that people commonly make when they're dealing with the IRS, and something that they definitely should not do that will not help their case?
Well, I think there's a couple of mistakes that they do, but I think the first thing is that a lot of people will go in and try to fight the IRS on their own, and that's very difficult if you don't have an understanding either as to the tax laws themselves or to how the IRS operates. I think that's number one, but if you are going to go in and deal with the IRS, maybe it's a small issue or maybe you do have the confidence or the records to back up your position. I think the major problem with a lot of folks is that they end up talking too much to the IRS. They give the IRS too much information, and by doing so, they may close the door on one issue, but by saying a few things, they may open up another issue that the IRS wasn't going to get into or maybe even didn't know about. So it gets real difficult into knowing how to reply to the IRS, to give them the documents or maybe the testimony, the oral testimony that the IRS may be looking for if you don't do this for a living. And I think that's really the number one handicap that most taxpayers have when dealing with such a massive bureaucracy like the IRS.
Yeah. Like I said, I've never been audited, and I feel for people who have. You do have a few options. There's a lot of services now that are just kind of, have spun up, that are like tax defense kind of people. But I don't know that you need to go to that extent, or sometimes it's like some of these services that help you get out of debt. They actually can many times make your situation worse. They end up presenting you another bill. There are other services. Do we have that one? CNN calculator. Well, let me show you one thing, and then we'll talk a little bit about the project. There's another CNN clip where many of these services will have something like this available.
How sound are your personal finances? Are you paying more in mortgage debt and housing costs than you should, given your income? Do you have enough tucked away in savings to meet unexpected expenses or to carry you over if you're laid off from your job? And what about your investment portfolio? Is it as diversified as it should be, or are you overly concentrated in one asset class? Given how volatile both the economy and the financial markets have been in recent years, it's more important than ever to know where you stand financially and how you might fare in difficult as well as good economic times. There are a variety of ways you can get a fix on your financial health, including sitting down with a financial planner or other advisor. But as a starting point, consider giving yourself a financial checkup by revving up our How Healthy Are Your Finances tool, or as I like to call it, our Do-It-Yourself Financial Stress Test. You begin your self-assessment by entering your age and annual income. You'll then be asked to plug in information about 7 key areas of your personal finances, including the amount you're paying in housing carrying costs, the size of your emergency savings fund, how much stock is in your investment portfolio, the amount of life insurance coverage you have, and how much you're saving each month for retirement. As you do this, you'll get immediate feedback showing how you're faring in each area compared with appropriate benchmarks. So, for example, if you earn $50,000 a year, and you have debt payments from mortgages, credit cards, and other loans of $2,000, you'll get a warning telling you that your total payments generally shouldn't exceed 36% of gross income. When you've completed all 7 parts of the test, which shouldn't take more than a few minutes, you'll get an overall grade that ranges from A+ to F. If you aced every single section of the test, good for you. You're on the road to a secure financial future. Although you probably want to go through this exercise again periodically to make sure you remain on track. But if you came in with less than a top grade, which I suspect will be the case for many of us, the idea is to look for ways to start improving in the areas where you fell short. So if our test tells you you're carrying too much debt, you might go to our Debt Reduction Planner tool to see how you can reduce the burden, or you might check out the debt management section of Bankrate.com for tips on how to consolidate loans and find credit cards and loans with lower interest rates. Similarly, if your investment portfolio is skewed too heavily towards stocks or bonds, you can go to our Asset Allocator tool for advice on how to create a stocks-bonds mix that makes sense given your financial goals and your tolerance for risk. And if you've fallen behind saving for retirement, you can go to our What You Need to Save calculator, where you get a quick estimate of how much you ought to be putting away each year, given your age and the amount of money you already have saved. If nothing else, the past few years of setbacks in the economy and the chaos in the financial markets have taught us the importance of being prepared. So give yourself a financial checkup, and if you find yourself lacking in any areas, start making improvements. You'll not only be much better prepared to weather future crises, you'll also be in a better position to prosper when the economy thrives.
So again, I don't necessarily buy in with some of these one-size-fits-all type approaches, where they tell you what your split ought to be between stocks and bonds. And like I said, right now I don't have any bonds, and people like all the pundits online and otherwise will tell you that that's probably about right at this point, that those things have got nowhere to go but down for the near future because of the situation with the interest rates. Kind of in keeping though with what he was talking about, this is in the syllabus, so this is directly available on Blackboard to you right now. About 1 month into the term, due no later than November 19th. So we got a few months to work on this, so no reason to panic yet. But planning effort using fully immerse in your career 5 years from now. Use fictitious data, or at least if you're using truthful data, you don't need to spell out, but whatever, just for your privacy's sake. And for most of you, you're going to be forecasting in the future anyway, so it's just kind of a guess. You'll use something like, this is what I plan to do. Again, plans change, but anyway, this is what I plan to do. I'm going to be a registered nurse. I'm going to be a mid-level accountant. I'm going to be whatever. Go on the internet, probably to a site like Glassdoor.com, and how much do those folks make? Okay, so this is what I intend to make. And I either am married or plan to be married or whatever. This is what the other person will make. And so those are kind of my going-in arguments. And we either have kids, plan to have kids, or not have kids, whatever. And so, but the important part on that is the goal setting. Do I need college? Do I need insurance? Do I need other stuff? It's really sad. Maybe it's just, you get more cynical as you get older, but it just infuriates me sometimes when you listen to some of these marketing things. One of my pet ones is this whole thing about trying to get all these seniors to move their money into gold. Gold and precious metals, in my mind, are not really going anywhere. Maybe it's a good place to just kind of preserve what you've got, but you're not going to, get rich overnight doing that. And the other thing are just some of them that are just kind of like the Gerber baby life insurance. Babies do not need insurance. Babies, if a baby dies, that is not, you didn't win the lottery. I would not want to run out and spend money because it's just, the baby doesn't need insurance. The parents need the insurance to provide for the baby. You know what I mean? The reason why you have insurance, and the reason why we'll talk more about this later, is the reason why typically you recommend have term life insurance is because insurance is a sort of a temporary solution to get people through a crisis if somebody happens to, depart, pass away, whatever you want to call it, die, sooner than is expected. So if you're like a new parent and you've got a house you just bought and you've got, an income stream that you're hoping to have for the next 20 years to send this kid to college, you need insurance. You need it badly. Because if you, die, you are going to leave people basically in a world of hurt unless you have prepared for them. But is that, you just bought that house now 30 years down the road, say you're 55 or whatever, your house is paid off, your kids are through school, and you started to amass a nest egg, you don't need insurance. You're basically self-insured at this point. If you leave, if you die, your people are they're going to have a paid-off house. They may have some sort of, survivor benefits from your pension or whatever, and they're in a much better situation. But that's all fine because insurance at that point, when you get to be older, gets expensive because your chances of dying are much higher. But when you're, for you all, let's say you're 21, 22, and oh my gosh, I say I need $1 million of insurance. The good news is you can get that for, $20, $30 a month probably. It depends. But that's what it was. I was in a unique situation. I had a couple kids, a house, whatever, and O'Grady, knucklehead. I don't know if you guys know Scott O'Grady. Got shot down, F-16 guy. Anyway, I was flying Weasels at the time, so we got deployed. And so we're going, literally into combat the next week. And so I ran out my insurance. It's easy to do. I was paying maybe $100 a month all told, and I had well over $1 million in coverage. But they will come over, and I remember they came over and did a blood test, and they made sure I wasn't smoking, and I told them I wasn't going to scuba dive anymore for a while, because they're looking at all these different things of ways you're going to die, and they may have certain limits on if you develop a condition. It may be harder to get insured. You're found to be diabetic. Maybe it's better to get the insurance now before you, get diagnosed. And some of those pre-existing conditions and stuff. But anyway, you can get insurance to take care of yourself. But back to that sample with the baby. If the baby dies, sure you're going to get some lump sum money, and it's going to be fairly inexpensive. But that money would be far better spent on the providers for that child, because that's what's really going to affect that child. And the providers of that child, because of their lifestyle, because of their age, are much more likely to die than babies. Babies, once they're a few months old, have a lot, they're brand new as compared to us that are not so much. So anyway, people always worry about their children, but it's really, you need to be worried about yourself, because that's what's going to affect it. So anyway, 4 to 5 page paper, not directive, but yeah, college saving. Again, it's kind of lifestyle dependent, and you can just pick a completely theoretical person if you have no idea. But you want to set up and say, okay, this would be my plan. I'm going to allocate this much to savings, and it's probably going to go in this type of investment based upon what you've learned here. This is where I'm going to get my insurance. In saving for my kids' college, it's going to go into this type of account, because if you just put it in a general account and get taxed every year, it's not going to grow very fast. If you put it in a 529 or a TUGMA, or there's a uniform gift to minors, and all these different state programs, and depending on where you may know where this kid's going to go to school, you can do that and really build a pretty significant nest egg for that child. Social Security, that's just, people, again, it's sad. Everybody figures it out in the end, but Social Security does not cover your needs. Social Security is it's not solvent. I mean, and it's starting to be means tested, and even more so in the future. Means tested means, if you make, say, $50,000, or you've got a huge nest egg in the bank for retirement, when you go to draw the Social Security money that you put into the program, no. So it ends up being more like a welfare program than a Social Security. And then there's a whole another thing that I'll actually give you guys this audio to listen to as well. But what's happened is, have you ever seen the guys Bender and Bender, the guys with the cowboy hats, the lawyers talking about Social Security? Anyway, what they do is they work with the states, because the states' welfare is a state-run program. So it comes directly out of the state budgets. Social Security and disability insurance is a federal program. So there's huge incentive for the states to get these people off of welfare and put them on Social Security. So Bender, these guys, that is their business model. States will pay them $1,500 a head per person for every person they can convert from long-term welfare to Social Security, which works out good for the states, transfers that burden. But it puts one more person on Social Security that's just, it's draining the system. It's insolvent. So anyway, look at you can go online and you can see, if I retire, what will Social Security pay me? And we're talking in the hundreds of dollars per month, which for most of you, is probably going to be pretty dismal, because the people who are living strictly on Social Security probably don't even have a house, and so they're paying rent. They're living off Social Security, and they're going to have to continue working, and even when their health doesn't support it. Type of life insurance. So I hit that pretty hard. There's there's all kinds of different complex, salesman delivered insurance products, life insurance products. But again, most people will advise you against that. There's two reasons. One, they're kind of hybrid investment plans, and there may not really be, something that's the best investment people are probably somewhere else in the field rather than in the life insurance segment. And then also, since it's a complex plan, it necessitates a salesman presenting it to you, which obviously that guy's got to get paid, so he's got to get a commission. But a little bit about time value of money. That commission is not paid, 30 years down the road. It's paid now. So that commission is taken out of your initial funds. So it's actually the worst possible time to reduce that money. If they took the money later on, it'd be less drastic. But since they take the money out of that seed money that you're putting in, it can be pretty pricey. Given a career field, expectation of a company pension, military, you're probably going to have some transition. What's your sort of plan B? And then 401k, again, that's typical thrift savings, or these are all tax deferred type things. 401k is just a normal. Nobody even calls it anything other than just a 401k. It's where you take a portion of your income and you tax defer it. You put it in a special account that you can't touch till you're like 59 and a half. If you touch it before, then we've got to pay 10% penalties plus taxes on it. So it's not advantageous to do that. I got 401b. It's actually a 403b. That's the educational one, and then TSP is the military one. And there's different types of accounts. But how are you going to do that? Are you going to use Roth IRAs? Are you going to use regular IRAs? Don't be too overwhelmed if you're not really that familiar with it, because we've mentioned these a little bit in tax planning, but we haven't really gone through them in depth. We will do that in the upcoming weeks to show you something. But again, anytime there's a commission involved, whether it's somebody selling you something, I'm just not a big fan, because and even for financial advice, I don't feel there's a term, a concept. Fiduciary is somebody who only is solely focused on your interest. Does not make any more, any less if they sell you something. They're giving you advice that is completely in your best interest. And it's tough for somebody to do that when they've got a commission stake in it. If you're paying them $200 to give you advice, $400 to give you advice, and that's all they're doing, and whether you buy anything or not, that's the kind of person you want, a fee-for-service kind of person. Just to validate what I'm saying, and again, you mentioned Sue Zorman, so we ran a lot of videos today. I'll do this last
Now, a
one.
video cue. Let's go to Catherine in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Good evening, Susie. I'm married with 2 young children. Our financial advisor signed us up for variable life insurance on my husband. We pay over $600 a month with a death benefit of $750,000. We've had it for 6 years, and I've never felt comfortable about it, and I'm wondering what we should do.
What you should do, first of all, is get yourself a new financial advisor. That's number one. Miss Orman here has a top 10 hate list of investments that she hates. And she hates them because they literally do absolutely nothing for you, and they do everything, in my opinion, for the financial salesperson that sold them to you. And variable life, universal life, whole life insurance, that's probably on the top of Miss Orman here's top hate list. So, the only type of life insurance that you should have, in my opinion, is term insurance. Insurance that's good for a specific period, a term, usually until your youngest child is 23 years of age. $650 a month for $750,000 of insurance. Do you know, with a 20-year level term policy, let's say you were in your 30s, you could do that for $50 a month. Not $650 a month, and then you could take that $600 and do what with it? Put it into a retirement account. Insurance was never meant to be a permanent need. It was only meant to be there during your younger years in case something happened before your assets built up. Here's what you need to do. I want you to get yourself a 20-year term insurance policy in place. Then cancel your other insurance. Never, ever, ever cancel insurance until the new one is in place. And like I said, get another financial advisor. All right.
I mean, she's more of an entertainer, but you will get kind of that same advice. And it's just so much easier. Because, believe me, term life, universal life, I mean, not term, but universal and whole life, it's like this weird concept, and they got to explain it to you, and how it works around, and how it's variable. So it's just like, this makes your head swim. Term is just dead easy. You look at your liabilities. This is how much I owe right now, and how much it's going to take to go, get kids through college. That's what it's going to take. That's what I need this year, and I'll, buy that policy, pay for it each, whatever, for that 20 years. And like I said, once your kids are through college, you're kind of set, and that's when you want to be done with it, because it starts to get expensive. So, questions on anything we talked about? Not so much. All righty then. Perfect.